You want me to wait? All right, everybody, welcome to week 3 of our webinar series. This week is gene pool engineering. It is going to be led by Ryan Kottenstette from Khosla Ventures. Khosla Ventures, in case you guys are curious, is a venture capital firm established in 2004. Khosla manages a fund for early and late stage investments as well as seed funding for experimental stage companies. They focus mostly on next-gen energy, new materials, internet, and silicon technology. Ryan is on the investment staff for Khosla. He works on projects involving vehicle electrification, energy storage, and even on improving times of Formula One race cars. Ryan was also one of the original team members at Amprius, which was a next-gen lithium-ion battery company based on, and worked as a research engineer at BMW Group, working on projects involving waste heat recovery, thermoelectrics, and also more vehicle electrification. He's also conducted research at the National Renewable Energy Lab and has engineering from Santa Clara University. He also has several patents to his credit related to thermal management and smart materials. I will go ahead and hand it over to Ryan to go through his slide deck. And if anybody has questions, please enter them in the chat box, and we will enable your audio so that you can ask them personally to Ryan. Thanks, guys.
Great. Suzanne, thank you so much for that introduction. So everybody, thanks again for joining us. It's my pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time and present our view on gene pool engineering. So the way I got involved with this was Winston and Suzanne came and approached me, Clean Energy to Trust, asked us to give a webinar on recruiting. This is, I think, one of the most critical things for early startups to get right. And Khosla Ventures has put together this, what we view as a unique and actionable methodology that we call gene pool engineering. If you want to spend, you can go to our website, which is listed here on the slide, khoslaventures.com, and you'll find a paper on gene pool engineering as well as a variety of other entrepreneurial resources. So be happy to point everybody there after that. So this is an example, this slide up here is an example of what we hear in a typical pitch when it comes to recruiting. When we drill down on this statement, we often identify several critical considerations that we think need to be further addressed. Really, a company becomes the people that it hires. The first hires that you make are critical because they establish the culture of the company, and they really set the bar for the talent you're going to be able to attract going forward. It's really not often that you're able to pull A players to join B teams, so it's critical that your first couple of hires really be of the top caliber and that you maintain that bar high. It's really important to dwell on, let's say, some of the importance of first hires. Founders and first hires, in our view, are absolutely critical, and each play a unique role in establishing the company. Whereas the founders primarily establish the product vision and really set the company in motion, first hires are critical in establishing that, that core culture of the company as a human organization, and also really carrying that vision forward, and they're often critical in building the first proof of feasibility. This is really in contrast, I think, in a very significant way to some later hires who typically are a more reactive role. You know, they'll support that culture that you've already established, and they'll help with follow-on iterations of the product or fleshing out some of the key issues. But it's really important in our way of thinking to distinguish that from the foundational role that your first hires are going to have in terms of their impact on the company. So really we ask ourselves, how does an entrepreneur find the right people? You know, it's been said that there's no actionable and teachable process for creating these precisely engineered teams. We disagree with that, and really in response to that attitude, we've developed this methodology called gene pool engineering, and we really seek for this to be quantifiable, teachable, and actionable, and we think through some of these methods. What we've seen from our 100 portfolio companies, this maximizes our ability to be successful. if you look at the traditional recruiting process, it really looks something like this. A position opens up in the hierarchy, and HR needs to, quote unquote, fill the job. Really, a hole opens up, and then we go and we try to fill that hole. Oftentimes, candidates are picked from a pool of prospective hires that really have a similar background that mirrors the gap that needs to be filled at the moment. I think, just coming back to this quote we iterated earlier, or an example from that, material science PhD, 10 years of experience managing material science projects. That might be a very typical sort of job description. The results of this sort of attitude really are, often we hire the familiar, and this means that we increase the homogeneity of our thinking and of our skill sets in the organization. This can be really, I think, damaging because it can lead to further groupthink and less thinking outside the box. The reason that's especially damaging to startups, in fact, often there isn't, and frankly, there ought not be, that brings undue bureaucracy and a whole bunch of other issues. The second reason this is critical is challenges evolve in the startup environment much more quickly. So if you're really just in this mode of what's the functional skill set I'm hiring for, what's the problem I need to solve, in the startup environment, you can very quickly be, your needs can change much quicker than you can hire for them. So in this type of environment, we find that unconventional thinking is much more critical because the problems that you're solving are often unconventional. You need to ask yourself some of these questions. We're looking for reactive functional hires. What do they need to react to? What really is the function? And often we're looking for cultural fit. Well, in the startup environment, we're establishing the culture in the first place. So really, the sum of all this is that traditional recruiting with this whole focus on a core skill set isn't sufficient for the startup environment. Startups require beyond the functional role type of thinking. But also we need to instill diversity. We really need to protect ourselves from increasing groupthink. I think in a lot of pitches you'll hear something like, look, our startup has 20 people, we could have 15 PhDs as sort of bragging rights. But the question is, we ask ourselves all the time, how many are from outside this particular market or this particular problem that you're trying to solve? How many are under the age of 35? Vinod says that frequently. And really the driver for that question is, do we have expertise that's often ingrained, or really do we maintain a sort of pliable and flexible way of thinking to address new problems? How many different fields do we draw from? Increasingly as we look at our portfolio companies, the interesting problems and the problems that result in big solutions in big markets are increasingly cross-disciplinary. And so we look at cross-disciplinary hiring. The objective is to create a culture where hires engage in problem solving, share best practices from previous organizations, but also bring a diverse set of backgrounds. We really try to hire for the specific problems that need to be addressed over our critical hiring horizon. And later on I'll get into a specific example we can talk through more in a Q&A fashion, but really try to put this into practice with an example. When we talk about engineering the gene pool, this is really the core methodology. So step one is really identify the 5 largest risks in the project. And this can be technical risks and business risks. Depending on the stage of the business, you really need to think about both. I think for this audience, we're really talking most frequently about early stage clean technology or physical science opportunities. Oftentimes, on our side of the table, we think about the business risk, and that's where we try to figure out, okay, is this an attractive venture for us? Is there a large market that can be disrupted here? So often, as you're looking to start a company, you want to be thinking about this and really be focused on large markets. As you turn the corner and you've started to close an investment, and now you're talking about building a team and pursuing that, very quickly your mode has to shift to also an important framework to think about what's intrinsic to the business versus what's extrinsic. You know, problems you can't control that are sort of outside of your control, it's important to be aware of those. But beyond that, you know, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of cycles trying to fix what you can't control. You know, you need to optimize for that with your plan and really focus on hiring for and building solutions for the risks that you can control. Having that mental framework is pretty critical. Step 2 is define the skill set and the experiences necessary to address these risks. You know, so after you've put down, let's take the example of a stealth company that we've just invested in that's doing a next generation sort of silicon fab based novel material. So without saying too much about this in detail, you know, the very first step that we did, we got together with the founders and we did this gene pool engineering exercise and really worked through, okay, you know, here's where we are today. 18 months from now, these are the set of performance requirements and milestones we want to hit. And over the arc of those 18 months, you know, let's work back from that and look at the core technical risks we're going to have to address in order to hit those milestones. And as we did that, we boiled it down to a list of about 4 or 5 core technical risks. And then we picked this appropriate skill sets and experiences one-to-one to address each of those. And the target hires that we're going to make really map well to the top 4 risks in our work plan. So the next step, step 3, is for each of these risks, you know, let's locate the 5 centers of excellence, both inside and outside the industry that can address that specific risk. So, you know, in the example that I'm talking about, this stealth mode new materials company, really the application is in energy efficiency, but the implementation is through more silicon style, semiconductor style fab. So let's say, for example, step 1 is we've made this list of 4 risks. The number 1 risk that boils to the top, for example, would be in a silicon wafer or in a semiconductor device built on a wafer. We want to have low electrical resistance inside of this device. That would be, for example, one concrete key risk. And we ask ourselves, okay, where are the centers of excellence that have addressed this? You know, we can look at silicon-based solar. We can look at energy efficiency devices like what we're trying to create, or, you know, we can even step beyond that and we can look at chip fabrication devices. So, you know, turns out there's a lot of integrated to this specific risk. Although they've built products for a completely different market, these are centers of excellence which will have trained the people and the people that have seen some of the key issues that we're going to have to deal with. So if you take a look at step 4, really the next step is let's take one level deeper, and within these centers of excellence, let's drill down. There's all sort of web tools you can use today. You can engage a recruiter at this stage. You can also spend your own time on LinkedIn. It's an incredibly useful tool in this regard. You can peel back the onion and look specifically for the individuals at these centers of excellence who have dealt with the key risks that you need to address. And then really step 5 is reach out to these people. This way you're going to have a very targeted search and, you know, and sell them on your opportunity and get them closed. So just moving on here, you know, I think the paradigm that I'm trying to get across is the key is to build a team that's optimized for risk reduction. You can either tune your team for the opportunity, or you can think about it differently and tune your team to reduce risk. You know, I think opportunity is really who do we hire if everything's going right. Tuning for risk is who do we hire to ensure ourselves that things aren't going to go wrong, and that we have a robust and dynamic team that are able to address those things, issues and challenges as they may come creep up. You know, I just put this in as a reminder to talk about a real-world example. I walked through this specific example of this stealth company that we started with a little bit. more than happy to, in a Q&A format, talk about more real-world examples as they come up. And I guess a last comment is that this thought process and methodology can, really this grew out of the need for a fresh startup, a team, just a couple of founders or a single founder, to really onboard the key core hires in order to bring the company forward. But I think it can be applied much more broadly than that. This is a useful framework to think about putting together a board of directors for your company or an advisory board. Often in early stage clean tech or physical science companies, you'll want to have an industrial advisory board or a skilled industry subcomponent of your advisory board. But you'll also want a more technical advisory board, and depending on the specific technology you're pursuing, you may need to draw excessively from academia to tackle some of the more fundamental problems. Then finally, you can apply this to picking through appropriate investors. One thing I think that sets Khosla Ventures apart is our ability to understand some of the core technical issues, particularly in this space of physical sciences or clean technologies, and then really to help add value from a strategic perspective, also from a recruiting perspective, and a new company and team formation perspective. So that's where we really add value, and where we find the best partners are really companies that value that addition to the team. I think different firms are going to have a very different set of resources and experiences to bring to bear. And it's really important to be thoughtful in understanding what your needs are beyond simply capital that are going to help you to be successful and minimize your risk of failure. So I want to thank everybody. That's all the prepared content I have. I'm more than happy to just turn this into a more open discussion format and answer questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to let me know in the chat box, and I can enable.
Okay, we got a couple of questions here. We're going to start with this one from Mike Gidding. Mike, just a second, I'll enable your audio. Mike, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks so much for the presentation. My question is, how can a student team attract talent from outside the university setting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Winston, is my audio enabled? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. That's a great question. I think the first step is really, I would walk through this process, and assuming the first step is really identify a critical opportunity, and once you've got an interesting opportunity in front of yourselves, then it's just pounding the pavement and selling it to the appropriate individuals to try to bring them on board and share that vision. You know, I would walk through a process like this and really identify the key individuals in the industry that are going to be critical for you to carry the ball forward. And then I would just be aggressive about getting out and getting in front of them. And, you know, oftentimes with the entrepreneurs that we meet, the passion for the idea really comes through. And that can be incredibly powerful in selling and inspiring other people on your ideas. So I think there's no special tactical magic to it. It's really for step one is identifying a great opportunity. Step two is identifying the appropriate audience and the key individuals that where it makes sense to onboard them. And then you've done all the sort of background work you can, and beyond that, you've got to let the passion come through and sell folks. You know, just as a personal strategy for connecting, my recommendation is always to backload some of the information and just try to get in front of folks. You know, otherwise you can make it pretty easy for, with a million obligations that other people have, you can make it pretty easy for them to filter through things and overlook you without the time of day. So to the extent that you can get in front of somebody face to face, that's the best. At least, you know, with a phone call is better than a simple email. So that's my advice on that one.
All right. And as a follow-up to that, how do you balance conveying that passion and excitement about the idea with, you know, you're not going to get them to sign an NDA after just saying hello. I mean, do you have any advice for how to balance sharing information to get them excited and you know, protecting proprietary info?
Generally, I think NDAs are way overused, way too early in the process. You know, let's break this into two buckets: clean tech and physical sciences, and then more web and IT. On the web and IT side, I think they're virtually useless because, you know, your competitive advantage is speed, right? Now let's talk about what most of this audience is more interested in, which is this more physical science related stuff. You know, in this regard, the vast majority of the things that you're working on, you should be developing a patent portfolio for. And, you know, there's often things that are covered by NDA or asked to be covered by NDA that's really unnecessary. The rule of thumb for me is when you're selling somebody on the opportunity, whether it be an investor or a potential employee, you really want to be able to tell them what. And what they really want to know is what. Whereas the critical part to protect and maybe not even convey in that first conversation is how. So how things work, the specific details, you know, if you have a process technology, the basic architecture and outline of your process flow is generally, you know, not something to be as sensitive about, whereas the specific process conditions, the recipes, that's pretty important to be protective about. I think in that first conversation, most of the critical stuff, in order for somebody to get excited or not about an idea, is the stuff that can be addressed without an NDA. I think oftentimes if the very first thing that you do is you ask somebody to sign an NDA, it can scare them off.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the question, Mike. We're going to move on to one from Curtis Knapp. Curtis, just hold on 1 second, and we'll get your mic enabled. Oh, man, we've got echo. So, Curtis, is that Curtis? Can we hear you? Is that you?
Can you hear me?
Yep, that works just fine.
Okay. My question is what the general industry standard mechanisms and compensation are for scientific advisory boards. So I'm getting a terrible echo. Hope you heard me.
Yeah, no, you came through on our end fine. So the question was, what's industry standard comp for scientific advisory board? It's a very good question. You know, in general, the rule of thumb on compensation, I think, changes dramatically whether it's pre-funding or post-funding. So if you raised venture funding or have some capital to pursue the idea or not, that significantly de-risks it. But I think that's more of an impact on employee level equity. When you start talking about a scientific advisory board or board of directors, it's a little bit different. I can give you so I'm just thinking about a few data points in my head. You know, oftentimes I'd ask for 5-year vesting. Increasingly in physical sciences, things it takes longer. And so that's a norm for Khosla Ventures, is to look for a 5-year vesting with a 1-year cliff. And along those lines, you know, depends on how active you want them to be involved. I think something on the order of 1/4 to 0.5% equity is pretty reasonable, and you can reimburse travel expenses as necessary, but usually cash comp is not necessary. So that's how I think about things. Does that answer the question?
Curtis, sorry, we had you muted for a second to avoid the echo.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, good. All right, well, then we'll move on to a question. This one from Alex, actually, here. One second.
Hey, thanks a lot for speaking with us up today. But my question was, as you go through the gene pool engineering, do you emphasize prior interaction with the potential team members, i.e., if you're looking to hire 2 or 3 people, does it help that maybe 2 of the 3 or all 3 of them have worked together before? Thanks.
Yeah, on that specific one, you know, I don't think it's that critical. It is very important to make sure that you have the right working dynamic amongst people. So, you know, it can, if people have worked together in the past and they know they mesh well and work well together, that's a really valuable input. And if that's the direction that you're pursuing, then the point to be more careful about or put a lot of thought on is, are you going to get into a groupthink mentality? You know, oftentimes, you know, the best environment really is where you have lots of, I think, active contribution, but diverse thinking. You know, so you need a little bit of healthy friction, and you need a little bit of devil's advocate. But you also need teams to gel enough to respect each other's different opinions. If everybody is totally in sync and thinks the same way, you often won't surface outside the box ideas, and it makes your team far less nimble in terms of pivoting with unconventional solutions. So you know, if you're picking a cluster of guys that you know mesh well together, that's the more critical part to look at.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. We've got one now from Catherine Ortegon. Catherine, hold on just a second. All right, Catherine, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I would like you to talk about the centers of excellence. I would like to know how to make that first contact and how to do it when the people in these centers of excellence maybe is not willing to provide you certain type of information.
It was a little bit, there was a lot of feedback. Let me make sure I got the question right. The question is, how do you, when you identify centers of excellence and you identify the individuals at those centers of excellence, how do you reach out to them? How do you get their contact info? Is that the question?
How do you how do you contact them, and how do you break the ice with them in order to get the information they need?
Yeah. I'm not sure I got the whole question, but you know, my thought, like I said, leverage whatever tools you can get your hands on. You know, you can network, and that's sort of the high information value, but slower identifying the right people. I think LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool. You know, it's really valuable to expand your network on that as broadly as possible, especially in your relevant fields. And that almost allows you to walk through the org chart of an organization and identify key hires. So that's, you know, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, so we're going to move on from David Snydecker. David, just a second. All right, David, this should work.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So we just had a question. I'm on a team that was kind of assembled for us and breaks down by degree in education. And since in the short term we don't really have the ability to engineer our gene pool, so to speak, do you have any thoughts on how to best kind of assign and delegate responsibilities given that static talent pool in the short term?
Sorry, can you, some of that was a little unclear.
Sorry, I can repeat. So I'm on a team of people that was assembled for a course up at Northwestern, and
Yeah.
so we're all thrown in the pool together, and we don't have the luxury of engineering our talent pool in the short term. Do you have any thoughts on how to kind of identify and best utilize skills on a team that is static in its composition in the short term?
Yeah, that's a fair question. You know, I would still go through this process. You know, if you look through the methodology, you know, the first step is really identify your key risks, and then your centers of excellence and the specific skill sets to address those. Now, I think you can still walk through the first half of that methodology without actually going and sourcing external talent. You know, I would make two lists. I would go through the specific risks to the milestones that you want to accomplish over your time horizon. So if this is a class course, you've got 6 months together or 9 months together. You know, identify where you want to get, and in order to hit those milestones, what are the key risks? And that second list would be, you know, I'd put down all the folks you've got on the team, and I'd try to link the specific skill sets from each one, and I would have a very dedicated conversation about that and really trade off who's going to be a better fit for the various of these issues. And then I would assign responsibilities accordingly so that you're matching up your internal team bandwidth against your key risks in the best way possible. But I think the most important thing is to drive that conversation and have everybody kind of on board with that explicitly. I would get everybody on board with the methodology first, and then go through it in practice and have that discussion and debate.
Great, thanks so much. That makes a lot of sense.
All right, so we're going to move on from Anna-Marie Ruda. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. 1 second, we'll get your mic enabled. That should work just fine now. Anna-Ruda, are you there? Okay, I'll go ahead and read the question. It says, with diversity hires, you're bringing in different schools of thought. Would it not risk conflict and lack of direction? Okay. I'm not sure I got the question right, so please, feel free to follow up if I didn't get it right.
Was the question? So the question
it says,
was.
The question is, with diversity hires, you're bringing in different schools of thought. Would it not risk conflict and lack of direction?
Sure. Absolutely, it risks those things. I think risking conflict is important. In fact, you want a certain degree of conflict. It's with different ideas that that we often can settle as a group on the best one. So you want to put that into the mix. I think if you are suffering from a lack of direct, the question is there's healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. If you're suffering from an unhealthy conflict, then you probably need to have a sit down and really understand sort of group working norms and flesh out some sort of interaction norms. I think that the healthy type of conflict is where different ideas are surfaced, and then they are discussed, and the positives and negatives are rationally debated amongst the team, and that's a very healthy process that helps you arrive at better solutions. But often things, if there's a risk that things are going to degenerate beyond the idea and personal conflict, then that's just that's a poor working dynamic, and you gotta settle that by putting in place some group working norms, and there's myriad resources for effective groups. On the issue of, sorry, the second half of the question was not about conflict, but lack of direction. Consensus is powerful, but it's not always the most efficient. So, I would be explicit up front about coming up with some group norms about how you're going to address these and work through conflicts, and then, what are you going to use to decide how to move forward. Oftentimes, a single person can move forward because they don't have to argue with anybody else, but you can get a lot less done on your own than an effective team. So that's the balance you got to strike.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. We're going to move on to Rahul Sigdata. Rahul, just a second.
Hi, Winston. Hi, Ryan. This is Nikki from Amplified Wind Solutions. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, just fine.
Great. So, Ryan, my question for you is actually sort of a general one. But as someone working for a venture capital firm, I was curious about your opinion in terms of when you listen to a startup company giving you their initial pitch. I understand it's good to talk about your team, but I'm sort of curious as to what you hope to hear about the team, and how in detail do you want the team? Do you want that person to go?
Yeah, look, it really varies from situation to situation.
Mm-hmm.
You really got an industry all-star, you should brag that person up. Past success, and this is just advice, to an entrepreneur having sat in those shoes. If you've got, a killer CEO or a killer advisory board that have had, those large-scale successes that people will recognize, it's a good idea to break that up. Now, setting that aside, I think, you want to understand kind of you want to frame the opportunity, so you want to understand, okay, who's driving the decision process here and what are their responsibilities, and then also how big is the team and kind of how does that break down? How many engineers, how many business people, how many are on process versus how many are on product. Kind of framing it, that's important, so you have the context. But then you just really want to drill down on key people. And I think when you drill down on that, you want to understand relevant experiences and skill sets. And that's it. So oftentimes, there's a list of names, and that's completely, unless that name is somebody like Barack Obama, doesn't matter, because, if you haven't heard about those people, the name's almost useless. You can put a name, but that's only useful because you find it the relevant experiences and skill sets. So, I think I'd highlight the key people, what their responsibilities are, and then what the relevant skills and past experiences that help them move the ball forward on those responsibilities would be.
Great.
On this issue, let me also say, one of the most important things that you can do that's often looked over is tying names and dates to responsibilities. So, you're going to have to show a milestone in a work plan, and that's really a fruitful discussion. But beyond simply a pitch, in terms of effectively managing your organization to hit your deliverables, sticking dates and names on deliverables is critical. And, it's surprising how little that happens. But you know, I definitely we notice. So I think it would you would stand out if you don't work from when you have names and dates kind of calling out responsibility. That's really helpful.
Ryan, just to make sure that I'm clear, because it was a little bit quiet on my end here, but you said so to really stand out, it would be to in your initial pitch really outline names, dates, and those specific deliverables that people will be responsible for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to do.
Great, great. And now, in your experience, okay, I'm sorry, I have one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead if you have a follow-up.
Yeah, in your experience, I mean, so let's say you have like a product that's a really great product. For you, can that team make or break whether you are interested in that product?
Yeah, absolutely it can. You know, there's all sort of different philosophies on this. It's almost a religion. Some focus primarily on the team, some on the product. You know, I think without a great product and market opportunity, even a great team is really a struggle. So it's critical to have a great product and a great market. But when you have those things, the poor team can still sink the ship. Yeah, I think it's critical.
Okay, looks like this is going to be our last question.
Let me add
Sorry,
to that.
Brian, did you want to finish?
Sorry, I did. There's one other thing I wanted to add to that, which is, you know, that's not to say that an incomplete team is a problem. In fact, you know, one of the areas we really pride ourselves on being able to add a lot of value is, you know, if there's really a core one or two founders, or you know, make the core of a team, you know, you can build a robust team, and you can do that together with an investor and a value-added investor. So it's not critical that you put the whole team together before you go out and raise funding. What I think is critical is that you take a thoughtful look at where your strengths and weaknesses are and what you need, and that you show a clear openness to filling those gaps. And that's, frankly, that level of flexibility is, I think, makes for very successful partnerships.
Okay, I think we can move on. Looks like this is our last question, although we do have this blocked out until 2 o'clock Central Time. So if you do have one, please take this opportunity to enter it. And there's one from Rodrigo Teixeira, so I'm going to hand it off here to Rodrigo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the talk. I have two apparent contradictions that I'm sure that if you're explaining some depth, they will be insightful. First is you talk about specifics in the hiring process versus aiming for diversity in the team. And if you take that face value, it sounds like a contradiction. Please enlighten those. And then my second part of the question is, you mentioned the centers of excellence and going for the top people in those centers. Now, one would argue that the top people are going to be experienced people who are almost surely going to be over 35 years of age. And so how would you explain that one? Thanks.
Sure. Let's back up to the first one. The first question was about the apparent contradiction between hiring for specific skill sets and hiring generalists. Was that, did I get that? Did I paraphrase correctly?
Yes. So I meant the narrowing down the risk, tiering that into 4 or 5 main subparts of your risk in your venture, and then hiring specifically for the skill sets needed to address those risks, versus building a diverse team which avoids groupthink and avoids, in sync decision making.
Yeah, sure. I understand. I understand the point about how that could be an apparent contradiction. I think the main message is that look, large organizations, sort of traditional recruiting, you have a job function and you need to fill it with a specific skill set. But that's really where it stops. I think, for sure, we're not saying that you should skip that. Where you have specific issues that experience can help you solve, you should take advantage of that experience and find it, and that's really part of what this methodology is about. However, that's not necessarily sufficient. You still need to balance all of these other issues. I would say the right experience to tackle the right problems in the startup environment, that's necessary but not sufficient. So you really do want to look for cross-functional teams with different experience sets coming out of different organizations, and that are also going to add a robust set of skills within your team that can address a varied set of problems. It may be that that your specific challenges change as you decide to pivot, and your product implementation changes. So the idea here is that you're going to have a robust set of skills that can tackle this family of problems as they manifest themselves and change through the milestones. And remind me the second question.
Right. No, thanks for that. The second part is top people versus under 35.
Yeah. I see the point. I don't think that's really a conflict at all. What's a top person for you is very idiosyncratic to your needs. It doesn't mean the leader of the organization. If you're developing a new material science technique, the CEO of 3M, the CTO of 3M may not be a good candidate for you at all. Frankly, the skills that you need are some specific experimental techniques or ability to solve these key technical problems, and those guys in their late 50s haven't probably done that in 25 years. So, I think it's really idiosyncratic, and depending, the top people for you are where are the best people in the world that have solved the types of problems that you're likely to encounter in the next 18 months. I think that's a different way to put it.
Right. Thank you very much. That really helps.
Great.
Okay, Ryan, I think that just about does it, unless we can give everyone an opportunity to ask a question in the next minute or so. If nothing comes in, I think we can call it quits early. What's that?
So this is actually a great time to wrap up if there are no more questions.
All right, well, I guess we'll take your cue. Ryan, thanks so much for doing this. I think this is immensely helpful, and I know I'm already getting feedback from the teams that suggest that this has been great for them. So thank you, and thanks, everybody. Looking forward to next week. We're going to have a presenter, Dave Cruikshank from Arch, and Wendell Holland, who is a former senior advisor on commercialization at the Department of Energy. And we will be discussing capital efficiency. So I'll send out a reminder on that for registration. And otherwise, look forward to next week. So thanks again, Ryan.
Great. Thanks to everybody.